Recently, I uploaded a video about a guy called Thomas Paine and two of his books called The Age of Reason and Common Sense. And Thomas Paine was considered to be like an English version of a very famous French author called, well, his real name was Francois Marie Arouet, but he's better known by his nom de plume, in other words, his pen name of Voltaire. And nom de plume, by the way, is from plumage because they wrote with a feather. Um, a lot of people, I think, myself included probably, might have vaguely heard of this guy, but then might have looked into him when they heard a quote that was going all around the internet a few years ago and still is. And it's a great one. And it's probably can't even be mentioned itself as a quote anymore. It's, the thing you're not allowed to question with the critical thinking you were taught if you want to find out anything, because you shouldn't, and don't, and stop that, and don't think, and just listen to whatever the TV tells you. You probably can guess the quote I'm saying, or I'm dancing around. Apparently, Voltaire didn't say it. It was a guy whose name I probably can't even speak aloud, but I'll say it in a sort of Italiano version of his name. Cavigno Alfredo Stromboli. So you'll figure it out from there. I'm just trying to hop over some landmines here and just get to the very natural idea that why ought not we to question anything or find out things? Can't we ask questions innocently? And there's a great book, anyway, that Voltaire wrote. He wrote a great many things, and I can't say that I've read any of them, which I must do. I must take time to do, apart from this one book called Candide, or Candid. And that's the name of the title character. What candid means is to be frank, but sort of innocent as well. You just ask an innocent question. But you know the way children can often ask very innocently questions that are very difficult to answer, and it can be a bit awkward if they're asked in company of others, where you might want to say, listen, shush there, we'll tell you later why that is, or why that person is that way, or why this situation needs to be this way or is that way, or how these things came to be. So just like all children's books, they used to be very innocent, which was like, how did this thing come to be? Why am I me? Why are you you? How did the world get created? Why is the sky blue? Why is the grass green? And all this sort of stuff. And these days, there could be any innocent question like that where somebody would say, shush, you're not allowed to ask. So anyway, Voltaire, he was definitely based in the Age of Enlightenment in Paris. And the Age of Enlightenment, I suppose, was, look, can't we get out from under the sort of grips of the Catholic Church or whatever powers that be are telling us that we need to just be quiet and do as we're told? Can't we ask questions, learn things? So Paris is known as the City of Light. There's a Greek connection in many, but a real simple one is that Paris was the lover of Helen of Troy, and Helen, or Hela, is Greek for light. So if he took the light back to Paris, that's where the Enlightenment, you could say, was, or it was a centre of it. And there was a lot of stars there, and there's a very famous Arc de Triomphe in a place called the Star, L'Étoile. So there's loads of connections there, the star shining, the light. Now, it can all sound very Illuminati, but you just have to look into it for yourself and take what's useful. So anyway, this book that he wrote called Candide, it was published in 1759. And Candide, he kind of got himself into a bit of trouble when he started asking a few questions and performing some experiments for himself. It's a really easy book to read. It was written in French, translated into English. Maybe they kind of translated it slightly flowery in a way, but it's a really easy read. And I think a lot of people think that, these famous authors from the past, or especially if you think about Paris, that it's all very sophisticated and highfalutin, and I mean, in one sense it is, but it's an image that we have of it. In other videos, I'd like to talk about Paris, and I think maybe people would be interested to hear of my experiences there and how I can contrast my memories of Paris in the 1980s and 90s too. I suppose mostly 1980s, and then much later then in 2000s and beyond and up to recent times, and how it's changed. Because Parisians might have their own ideas, and I might have a perspective that's both from an insider and an outsider. Anyway, Candide kind of got himself into a bit of trouble, as I say. And he was very naive in all things, very innocent, even though he was sort of an adult, but he had a childlike mind. And he was friends with a very sort of, I suppose, grand philosopher. He was known as the greatest philosopher in the kingdom that he lived in. And his name was Pangloss, which might sort of mean something like, oh, everything's lovely, everything's rosy, everything's shiny and good. And his whole philosophy was, or the core of his philosophy was, everything is as it needs to be. And you might not think it's perfect, but it is. It has to be that way. And maybe he was like a PR agent for the kingdom, and that's why they liked this fellow Pangloss. But they both got each other, or they both got themselves into trouble, I think, in a similar way, because Pangloss was into sort of experimental philosophy, where he wanted to also look into the idea of cause and effect in a very direct way, with some of the women of the kingdom that maybe the baron or the king liked. And Candide as well, I suppose, had a little interlude or escapade with a maiden who dropped her handkerchief, and so the two of them were exiled from the kingdom, and tragedy soon befell them, and they ended up adventuring together all around the world, where Pangloss thought he knew it all, and he was going to explain the world like a tour guide to Candide. And Candide was always innocently asking questions, and there was lots of things that he just couldn't understand, all these ideas about how the world worked and how it all ran, and he just couldn't wrap his mind around it, you know? It was just all too confusing and sophisticated for his simple mind. And of course, an example of that was finance and money and the idea of what's valuable. And so the more he was told things were the way they are for perfectly sensible reasons, the less it all made sense to him, curiously enough. So I won't give you a rundown of the whole book, but I could just give you this little plot point to say that they got to a place called El Dorado, and they saw these children when they got there. They're playing in the streets, and they were playing hopscotch maybe, or some kind of game where they were throwing stones and this kind of thing. And then they noticed, hey, those are not just ordinary stones. Those are diamonds and rubies and sapphires and emeralds. And they thought, wow, the people here in this kingdom must be extremely wealthy. And when the children went inside to play, or were finished playing and went inside to have their dinner or something, into their houses, they just left these stones on the street. And the two of them gathered the stones up, and they went to the house, and they said, hey, your children left these here. Oh my God, you got to be careful. And the people in the house went, what, those old things? You like those, do you? Well, you can keep those if you like. They're all over the roads. So it was a curious thing about what people attach value to, and they brought them in and gave them whatever they like to eat. And they said, well, we don't consider those things precious. What use are those? We just think that we're rich if we have food and a nice home and good community. So you might be able to see where it's going. So he went all around the world, and he ended up basically coming back to where he started, but he learned a lot along the way. And it's even got a nice lesson about gardening and tending to your own garden. So I think this book is going to be very useful. I mean, you could definitely read it to children. The whole interlude that he had himself in a garden with a more sophisticated lady is handled in such nice language that I think a child wouldn't really understand it. And you know, you could actually read a chapter at a time to your children, and it would be, you know, a great adventure, I think.